What's up, fellas? Just finished up my primary leg day, squat day, whatever you want to call it. Kind of where I'm at in the training cycle. I was finishing up my strength phase, and I felt I didn't have sufficient positive momentum on most of my lifts for going into a peaking or like a 1RM phase to be either efficacious or safe. I think that a lot of the times what you'd be doing if you haven't laid down sufficient foundation, you're attempting to force progress. And one thing I've learned by being a very stubborn person and trying to force progress over and over is it's a little bit more like a garden, right? You cannot force progression. You cannot force adaptation. What you can do is you can provide the environment that facilitates growth, right? So we put our body in an environment where we have sufficient sleep. We have the right nutrients, both micro and macro. We apply the correct training stimuli. So good technique, good frequencies, have a good progression scheme, and basically put our body in the environment most conducive to the adaptations that we want, but you cannot force them. And so when you force your way into a peaking phase, you have numbers that you feel you need to hit. And oftentimes, if you're stubborn and you get fired up enough, you can move them, but you're achieving progressive overload at that point oftentimes by altering your motor pattern. Significant deviations in motor pattern is often how injuries might occur. We build up all this strength in one position, but then to move the weight, we alter to a completely different position where we have not built up our strength. So that's something I've become wary of, and I enjoy my hypertrophy work anyway. But my squats are moving quite well. I ended the strength phase with a pretty heavy PR set of 5 on the SSB, so I felt like I was kind of missing out by not peaking out that one and hitting the PR I felt I was good for. So what I had intended to do was roll over the block for the overhead press, the bench, and the deadlift, and continue peaking out the squat. Usually this isn't something I advise because when we're training things in phases, we're emphasizing different global elements. So not just the specific muscles, but globally there's CNS properties that we're training towards the end of a block. There's endurance properties that we're training at the beginning of the block. So when we train our lifts asynchronously, we can kind of run into the problem of a CrossFitter, right? And it's not a problem, it's what they do, right? You kind of end up being a jack of all trades, master of none, rather than synchronously training our lifts and focusing on discrete qualities one at a time. That being said, it can be done at some level. I have never really peaked in a powerlifting fashion, focusing on singles, building up technique on singles specifically, and getting really good at displaying the base that I've built with singles specifically. It's just not something I've done because I always want to stay building, and rep strength is often a little bit more applicable to strongman, which has always been my goal, as I think it's a little bit cooler. So staying good at reps rather than getting really good at displaying the base as a 1RM is something that I've kind of always done. I've never really done a peaking cycle, so I could probably get away with training multiple qualities at once and still exceeding my personal best, because my personal best is probably shy of what I could do. If you look at someone like Max, we have very similar 1RMs in the squat, but my 5RM is like 50, 60 pounds heavier than his. Even if he went maximally, it's still probably 40 pounds ahead of his, because I've spent my time building that base and never getting good at displaying it. Whereas Max is a competitive powerlifter, we regularly work on our ability to display 1RM strength, and he's a hell of a lot better at powerlifting than I am because he works that quality like he should, whereas I have always refused to. Even when I was a powerlifter, I hated spending time that I felt was just showing what I've got rather than building, which is a little bit of a logical fallacy, but that's kind of always been my thing. So I thought I could get away with it. So I came into today with the intention of spending the next 3 to 4 weeks continuing to peak out my squat, aiming to end with either 725 or 730. My warm-ups were going good, and I kind of had in the back of my head that training lifts asynchronously isn't the best idea. So when my warm-ups started moving really well, I felt pretty solid for once in my life. Usually I feel weak. Felt kind of strong today for once. So I was like, fuck it. I'll try to get this out of the way now. And I went for an all-time squat PR. Because I did not prepare very well and I didn't know coming in that this was going to be a maxing session, I missed my first attempt flat out. Little misgroove where I didn't get scoop my hips under early enough. Otherwise I probably had it. And then I realized that it was a technical error. I rested for about 6 minutes and I came back and I got it. I really did myself dirty because I did not take off my sweats. So the already borderline depth looks fucking terrible. But I'm also not a delusional idiot who's going to say, oh, it's the angle, it's the sweats, that was deep. No, it wasn't deep. It was probably right about parallel. Usually I'm pretty realistic with these things because it doesn't matter to me all that much. As a strongman, squatting to depth is something that you never really need to do. That being said, I like to hold myself to a higher standard. So now that all my lifts can be synced up, my goal for this coming training cycle will be to take 735 a bit deeper. I think that with some actual peaking rather than just going straight in from a strength phase into maxing, that will be a very realistic goal. Usually I'm stronger to a good depth nowadays, that I do a little bit more of a bounce. When I get scared and cut it, I end up being weaker oftentimes. This bar was a little whippy, which is always why I get a little spooked, but we ended up getting it done. I'm counting it because I don't particularly care. But I also filmed the whole session, so I will add a voiceover after this. As always, thank you guys for watching my video. It means a lot to me. And I'm sorry for not posting more often. I've kind of been getting in my head a little bit now that people actually kind of watch these. I'm like, oh geez, I got to get my materials ready. I got to do a better job putting stuff together. And I've kind of artificially raised the barrier to entry for making a video, where it used to be I could just toss down my phone, just say some shit. Now I'm like, oh man, I got to get my Spark Notes ready. You know, I got to make sure I make a slideshow to go through as I talk, which I, you know, every now and then I do, and the videos turn out better. So I'm trying to find a good middle ground. Let me know, but I really appreciate you guys watching my videos. It means a lot to me. What's up, fellas? It is I, again, voicing over. So started out with a 10-minute treadmill walk, do a little bit of side-to-side step, some backwards walking, just get the blood flow distributed somewhat evenly across my legs. Obviously, walking is going to be a little bit more posterior chain dominant. Going to get the adductors and glutes a little bit more of the side-to-side walk, get a little bit of blood flow in the quads going backwards. Not all that important. You'll notice I'm wearing a different outfit for the warm-ups. That's because this is from a scrapped video where my camera died in the middle of my top set last week. But I did the same warm-ups today, so I figured I could get away with not filming them this go-round. Just running through some really quick lower body mobility. The mobility takes me less than 5 minutes probably. I've just found those two things are the things I need to focus on personally. Just stretching out the front of my leg, hip flexors, quads a little bit, and then getting the adductors moving. Then I'm usually good to go to start with some specific warm-ups. So usually I start with the empty bar for 2 sets of 15. Then I go up to 160 for 12 usually, as shown here. Moving pretty well today. Everything felt pretty decent, felt pretty snappy. I credit this largely to the fact that I finally figured out a way to cook ground beef without any added fat. I have IBS, so any additional fat I get in my diet usually just makes me feel like shit. But to get my ground beef in, you know, you have to grease the pan or it'll stick. So I always had that issue where I was intaking a little bit more fat than I needed to anytime I had a ground beef meal. But I found if you make giant, like, square burger patties, you can prepare the ground beef on the grill and then remash it up. And that was a way to cook the ground beef without worrying about adding any additional fat. So I started doing that, and I felt phenomenal today. My pre-workout meal didn't bog me down as much as it usually does, so I have my energy levels, were good, which is extremely rare, and then the weights felt strong, which is also extremely rare. Usually I feel like things are moving much worse than they are, just subjectively. So I took plate jumps up to that, I think it was 380, jumped up to 450 for 4, then to 530 for 3, which was my last set of multiple reps. At this point, I kind of had the idea in my head of potentially just maxing today, a little bit underprepared, and getting that out of the way so I could just start a regular training cycle rather than having to peak out the squat. And then how this 600 moved, I was like, yeah, fuck it. All right, we're going to try. It's not the smartest thing in the world, as I haven't touched anything over 650 this training cycle, and trying to go up to 730 is a big ask. But I went up to this 670, which was going to be my rep set for the day. It moved pretty decent. Felt a little bit awkward. Hips are a little tight for my last squat day, but it moved well enough to justify what I was planning on. Went in to 730, trying for a 10-pound PR, mostly just because I'm an asshole and I wanted to chip Max's best squat. kind of got out of the groove, couldn't really fight it, felt really solid out of the hole. Strength felt good, so I rewatched the video, realized that was probably a bit of a bar path issue, but made some errors on this top set, kind of panicked and took my stance a little bit too wide, being the main issue, so I couldn't hit the hole like I normally do. Can't say I'm super happy with the depth. I mean, I think it was a little bit better than it looked. I think that the sweatpants certainly don't do me any favors, but I'm happy with it. I mean, I've counted worse squats than that. I'll just play the usual I'm a strongman card. Can't say I'm super stoked with it. Very frustrated with myself for not just taking it slightly deeper, as I don't think that would have made any difference. If anything, I think it made it a little bit better as a bit of a bouncy squatter, but it is what it is. I'll just spend this training cycle making sure I prepare to take 735 to a little bit higher standard. Just a little frustrated with myself, but if you're never frustrated with yourself, you're probably not holding yourself to a reasonable standard. So then I moved on to some volume just to get some blood flowing, get the conditioning in for this hypertrophy phase that I'm entering today. So I started out just with like 2 sets of 15 on the full ROM leg press, which doing full ROM leg press definitely is a bit tough for sets of 15. That additional range of motion certainly adds up a lot when you're going higher reps. So basically this was just me trying to get in my early block conditioning so that as I push my heavy sets of 15 for the next couple weeks, they don't just gas me out. I can go more towards muscular failure rather than work capacity failure. Second one, I paced it a little bit better. Ended up being a lot easier. Excited to push the leg press as always. It has always yielded me good returns. Been a good exercise for myself as long as I do them with a full range of motion. And then I was going to end the day with some leg extensions. I thought I would be cool and do the pendulum hack squats for a set of 20 instead. This was a really stupid idea because everything was smoked after this workout at a time where I'm just starting the training phase. So this was pretty dumb. Probably should have stuck to one secondary squat pattern motion in the leg press and done some leg extensions as if I were smart. But I am not smart, and I wanted to do the cooler thing, even if it's just 2 plate hack squats. So we got this done. I realized my mistake. Hopefully for the next 2 days of training before my next rest day, I'm not just completely destroyed. But yeah, overall,